The desert stretched in every direction, wide and endless. The sand was not the usual yellow or gold that people expected. It was black, like burnt ash, and it shimmered strangely under the sun. Heat waves bent the air, making the horizon dance. To many, this place looked empty and dead, but to Daniel, it held a promise. Daniel was the leader of a small team of explorers. He was not a rich man, not a famous one either, but he had a heart full of curiosity. He believed that Earth still had secrets left buried under its soil. People said the age of discovery was over, that satellites had mapped every corner of the world, but Daniel disagreed. There were always places no one truly understood, and this desert of black sand was one of them. His team walked behind him, each carrying heavy packs of water and tools. Among them was Maria, a skilled archaeologist who loved old carvings and languages. Beside her was Tomasz, a quiet man who kept the equipment working. Behind them walked two young helpers, brothers who guided camels loaded with supplies. All of them trusted Daniel, though they sometimes whispered their doubts. For days they marched under the burning sun. At night, the desert grew cold, and the sky turned into a field of stars brighter than anything in the city. The team would sit around a small fire, talking quietly. Maria often asked Daniel why he was so certain that something lay hidden under the black dunes. Daniel would smile and point to the stars. "Old stories," he would say. "Legends of a pharaoh not of Egypt but of the heavens. His tomb is said to rest in this desert, sealed by time and sand." People forgot, but the desert remembers. Most of the team laughed when they first heard it, but Maria did not. She knew history held more mysteries than answers. On the seventh day, when the sun was high and the wind was sharp, Daniel noticed something strange. A ridge of sand rose higher than the rest, and a dark shape poked through it. He called the team forward. Together they brushed the sand away with their hands. Soon the top of a stone gate appeared. It was wide, heavy, and covered with carvings that looked older than any pyramid. The carvings showed tall figures with strange crowns. They did not look like Egyptian kings. Their faces were longer, their eyes larger, their hands raised as if holding fire. Around them were symbols no one could read. Maria bent down, tracing one line of symbols with her fingers. "This is not Egyptian," she whispered. "Not Sumerian. Not any language I know." Daniel pressed his palm against the center of the gate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint glow spread across the carvings, running like liquid light through the stone. The team stepped back in shock. The glow pulsed once, then faded, but the carvings now seemed alive, as if the stone itself breathed. Tomasz dropped his pack. "We should leave. This is not for us." But Daniel shook his head. His heart raced. He had searched for years, and now the desert had answered. "We came to find this," he said firmly. "And we will see what lies inside." The team set to work. They dug away the sand covering the gate. It took hours, and the sun burned their backs, but finally the full doorway was revealed. It was taller than two men and sealed tight. Daniel noticed a slot in the middle shaped like a hand. He pressed his palm against it again. This time the stone groaned, and the ground shook. A line split down the middle of the gate, and slowly it began to open inward. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of dust and age. The camels cried out nervously, and the young brothers pulled them back. Inside was darkness, deep and silent. The team lit their torches. The light revealed a hallway leading down into the earth. The walls were lined with more carvings and filled with black sand that had somehow drifted inside even though the door had been sealed. Maria's voice trembled as she spoke. "This is not a tomb of men. This place feels different." Daniel did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the dark passage. He felt as if the desert itself had opened its heart to him. Every part of his being told him this was dangerous, but curiosity pushed him forward. He stepped inside, the torchlight dancing on the walls. The carvings showed tall figures standing above smaller humans. Some figures carried orbs that shone like suns. Others held weapons that looked like spears of lightning. The humans below them were kneeling, reaching up as if begging. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. The black sand crunched under their boots, though no wind had carried it here. At one point, Tomasz stopped and scooped some into his hand. It slipped through his fingers like fine dust, yet it seemed to move slower than normal sand, as if alive. He quickly let it fall. After what felt like hours, they reached a wide chamber. The ceiling was high, lost in shadows. In the center stood a massive stone sarcophagus. Unlike the others found in Egypt, this one was smooth and dark, with lines of glowing carvings running across it like veins of light. The team stood in silence. The air seemed heavy, pressing on their chests. Daniel approached the sarcophagus. His torchlight flickered across its surface, and he saw symbols carved into the stone. They spoke of a ruler called the Pharaoh of the Stars, who crossed worlds and brought empires to their knees. It told of his fall, of how he came to rest here, far from the heavens, waiting. Maria read the last line aloud. When the hand of man touches the seal, the Pharaoh shall awaken. The chamber grew colder. The sand shifted around their boots as if stirred by an unseen wind. Daniel's hand trembled as he reached forward. He brushed away the black dust covering the center of the sarcophagus. A low hum rose from the stone, deep and steady, as if something inside had heard him. The team stepped back in fear. Daniel froze, his heart pounding. The desert above was silent, but deep below, in the tomb of black sand, something ancient had begun to stir. The deep hum grew louder as Daniel's hand rested on the sarcophagus. The sound was not only in the air but also in their bones, as if the stone itself had a heartbeat. Maria's torch shook in her grip, and the light flickered wildly against the walls. The carvings of tall figures seemed to move in the trembling glow, their eyes staring down at the intruders. "Daniel, step back," Maria whispered. Her voice was calm but filled with fear. He did not answer. His palm felt warm against the stone. The carvings under his hand pulsed with faint light, spreading in thin lines across the sarcophagus. One by one, the glowing veins lit up, connecting into patterns none of them could understand. The young brothers cried out and stumbled backward, nearly dropping their torches. Tomasz pulled them close and muttered a prayer under his breath. A crack appeared on the surface of the sarcophagus. At first it was small, only a hairline, but it spread quickly, branching into many paths. The black sand around the chamber stirred, rising slightly as if the ground itself breathed. Daniel stepped back at last. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He knew he had touched something beyond his world, something older than any human empire. Yet his curiosity burned stronger than his fear. With a deep groan, the sarcophagus lid began to shift. Dust fell from the cracks. The air grew even colder. The team's torches dimmed, though the flames did not die. It was as if the darkness itself fought to swallow their light. Maria grabbed Daniel's arm. "This is not just a tomb. This is a prison." Her words echoed across the chamber, and for a moment, silence returned. Then, with a slow and heavy motion, the lid of the sarcophagus slid aside. Inside was not a dried mummy wrapped in cloth. Instead, a figure lay dressed in layers of metallic fabric that shimmered faintly under the torchlight. The face was covered with a mask shaped like a long crown. The material did not look like gold or stone. It looked like something crafted beyond earth, smooth and shining, yet scarred by age. The figure's chest rose once, then again. A faint breath filled the air, carrying a sound like the hiss of wind across a dune. The team froze. The figure's eyes opened. They glowed faintly, not bright, but steady like embers in the night. He sat up slowly, joints creaking as if waking from centuries of rest. "Who calls me?" the figure said. His voice was deep, not spoken by mouth but echoing in their heads. It was not a question asked in anger. It was spoken as if he already knew the answer. His gaze settled on Daniel. You. Human. You touched the seal. Daniel's mouth went dry. His team stood behind him, waiting, terrified. He forced himself to speak. I am Daniel. We are explorers. We came from the desert above. The figure tilted his head. The metallic layers shifted with the sound of grinding sand. Explorers, he repeated, as if testing the word. So your kind still wanders. Still seeks what it does not understand. It has been long since I looked upon a living human. Maria swallowed hard. You know our kind. The figure turned toward her. His eyes glowed brighter for a moment. I knew your kind when it first crawled from the cradle. I ruled when your world was young. I was Pharaoh not of Egypt but of the stars. I crossed the heavens and bent empires to my will. The black sand around the chamber shifted, forming small waves that lapped against their boots. The torches flickered again, as if the sand itself drank their light. Tamash spoke for the first time. His voice was sharp with fear. You should have stayed buried. The pharaoh's eyes narrowed, but he did not rise in anger. Instead, he lifted one hand. The black sand responded, lifting from the ground in a thin spiral that curled through the air. With a flick of his fingers, it dropped again. Buried, yes. By enemies who feared me. They could not kill me, so they chained me here, in the desert of black sand. They hoped your kind would forget. But I knew one day humans would return. Daniel took a step forward. Why us? Why humans? The pharaoh leaned closer. His mask caught the torchlight. Because you are not weak. Even when bound in chains of time, I saw it. Humans carry something others cannot control. That is why I chose this world as my throne. That is why they feared me. Maria's heart pounded. She realized something troubling. You said enemies. Who are they? The pharaoh did not answer at once. His gaze drifted upward, as if looking through the stone ceiling toward the endless desert and the stars above. They are hunters who cross the skies. They will come. They always come. And now, because you touched the seal, they know this place lives again. The words fell heavy on the team. The chamber, already cold, seemed to grow colder still. The young brothers clutched each other's arms. We should leave, one whispered. The pharaoh's eyes glowed brighter, and his voice struck their minds again. Leave if you wish, but you cannot run. The tomb is no longer silent. The signal has been sent. Soon they will descend upon your world. And when they do, only I can stand against them. Daniel looked at his team. Fear showed in every face. But he also saw something else in Maria's eyes, wonder. She was an archaeologist, a seeker of truths, and here stood a truth beyond any history book. The pharaoh slowly rose to his feet. He was taller than any man, his metallic robes brushing the sand. Each movement carried a weight of power and age. Human, he said to Daniel, you have awakened me. That makes you part of my story. You may fear me, but you will need me. Remember this. As his words echoed, the walls of the chamber trembled. The carvings glowed again, brighter than before. The black sand swirled around the sarcophagus, rising in small whirlwinds. Shapes began to form in the sand, vague and shifting, like shadows learning how to stand. Maria gasped. They are moving. The sand shapes grew taller, arms and legs forming, faces blank but fierce. They were not alive, yet they walked. Their steps crunched against the floor as they gathered around the pharaoh, forming a silent guard. The team backed away. Fear clutched their hearts, but Daniel could not move. He stared at the pharaoh, at the rising army of sand, and felt the desert's ancient secret pressing down on him. He knew now this was no simple discovery. This was the beginning of something greater. Something dangerous. The pharaoh lifted his hand once more, and the sand soldiers froze. His gaze burned into Daniel's. The choice will be yours. To flee, to fight, or to rule. For the hunters will come, and humanity will be tested. The chamber fell silent again, but the weight of his words stayed heavy in the air. Daniel realized one truth: the desert had given him an answer, but the price of asking might be the fate of the entire world. The chamber was still except for the faint shifting of black sand around the pharaoh's feet. His new-formed guards stood silent, their hollow eyes fixed on the explorers. They did not breathe, did not blink. They were not alive, yet they waited for a command. Daniel's hand gripped his torch tightly. The flame shook in the cold air, but he did not let it fall. He forced his voice to stay steady. Who are you really? You call yourself Pharaoh of the Stars. What does that mean? The figure stepped closer, robes of metallic cloth dragging over the sand. His height towered over Daniel, yet his movements carried a slow grace. The mask he wore gleamed faintly in the firelight, lines of strange patterns etched deep across its surface. I was a ruler beyond this world, the pharaoh said. His voice filled the chamber, echoing not just in their ears but in their minds. Before your people built their first city, I had already crossed the skies. I commanded fleets, armies, and empires. I was worshipped as a god, feared as a conqueror. When I came to your world, I chose to be called Pharaoh, for the tribes of earth understood that word. But my throne was never only Egypt. My throne was the stars. Maria's eyes shone with wonder. She stepped forward despite her fear. So the old stories of kings who came from the heavens, they were about you. The pharaoh inclined his head slightly. Stories are broken mirrors of truth. The people of earth could not understand my kind, so they carved us into gods. But I was no god. I was a ruler, a warlord, and a seeker of power. And like all who rise too high, I faced enemies. The black sand on the floor shifted as he spoke, swirling in slow circles. The explorers listened as if caught in a web of words. My enemies came from far worlds, the pharaoh continued. They were not weak like the tribes of earth. They were hunters, shaped by war, bound by hunger for dominion. They saw me as a rival, and so they struck. Even my power could not defeat them forever. They chained me here, deep in this desert, buried in silence. I was meant to sleep for all time. He raised a hand, and the sand soldiers straightened, their hollow forms sharp in the flickering light. But chains cannot last forever. I waited, knowing one day humans would find me again. I did not know who, but I knew the desert would choose. And it chose you, Daniel. The sound of his name spoken by that voice made Daniel's chest tighten. He felt as though the desert itself had whispered his name long before he was born. Why me? Daniel asked. I am no king. I am no warrior. I am only a man who searched for the truth. The pharaoh's eyes glowed faintly. That is exactly why. You are not bound by greed or hunger for power. You came here not to steal but to seek. Humanity has changed since I last walked this world. You are stronger now, not with weapons, but with will. And it is will that the hunters fear. Maria's heart pounded. She understood something that chilled her. If they chained you here, then they know where this tomb lies. If they feel you waking, they will return. The pharaoh turned his gaze upward, as if staring through the ceiling into the night sky. Yes. Even now, they will have felt the signal. They are coming. Their ships will pierce your skies. They will not only hunt me, but they will also see humanity as prey. Your kind will stand at the edge of fire. The young brothers clutched each other in fear. We cannot fight ships from the stars, one whispered. The pharaoh looked at them, and his voice grew deeper. You cannot fight them as you are. But with me, you have a chance. With me, you may turn the hunters into the hunted. I know their strength, their weakness, their hunger. But to rise against them, I will need more than soldiers of sand. I will need humanity. Daniel felt the weight of his words. He glanced at Maria, Tomasz, and the brothers. They were ordinary people, not warriors. Yet the Pharaoh spoke as if their kind carried something greater than armies. Tomasz stepped forward at last, his fear turning into anger. You speak of needing us, but we do not know you. Why should we trust a ruler who once conquered worlds? You call yourself Pharaoh, but perhaps you are only another tyrant waiting to rise again. For the first time, the Pharaoh's eyes dimmed slightly. His voice softened, though it still shook the chamber. I was a conqueror, yes. I was feared, and I ruled with iron. But centuries of silence change even the proud. In this tomb I saw visions of humanity's rise. I watched your kind build cities, ships, and knowledge. You grew not by chains but by spirit. And that spirit is what I need. Not to rule, but to stand against what comes. Maria studied him closely. If we help you, what becomes of us after? Will you rule earth again? The Pharaoh's gaze held hers. That choice will not be mine. It will be yours. Humans must decide their own path. I can guide, I can teach, but the final choice rests with you. His words echoed in the chamber, heavy with meaning. The explorers stood in silence, each caught in thought. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility press upon him. He had led them here out of curiosity, never expecting to awaken something so great. Now the fate of more than his team rested on his shoulders. The Pharaoh spoke as if humanity itself had been given a test. Why tell me all this? Daniel asked at last. Why not simply command your sand soldiers, walk out of this tomb, and take what you need? The Pharaoh stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over Daniel. Because chains are not always made of iron. My enemies left chains of silence, chains of memory, chains of doubt. To break them, I need a human voice. If I rise alone, the hunters will see only a tyrant returned. But if I rise with humanity beside me, they will see a force they cannot break. The sand soldiers around him shifted slightly, as if bowing to his words. Maria whispered, this is more than history. This is the beginning of war. The Pharaoh lifted his hand, and the glow of the carvings across the chamber brightened. The images of tall figures and kneeling humans lit up, telling their silent story. His voice thundered softly in their minds. The hunters come. You must choose whether to hide, to serve, or to fight. And if you fight, I will fight with you. The chamber fell silent once more, the air heavy with his promise. Daniel stared at the Pharaoh, his torch burning low. He did not yet know what choice he would make, but he felt the truth in his bones. Humanity was no longer hidden. The stars were watching, and soon they would test whether mankind was prey or something greater. The chamber trembled as if the desert itself had taken a breath. The sand soldiers standing around the Pharaoh shifted, their hollow bodies crackling softly like dry leaves. Their blank faces turned toward the explorers. Daniel's grip on his torch tightened. Do not fear, the Pharaoh said. His voice rolled across the chamber. They are mine. They obey only me. They are born of the black sand, shaped by my will. They will not harm you unless I command it. Even so, Maria and Tomasz stepped back. The brothers pressed themselves against the wall, their wide eyes fixed on the strange soldiers. The creatures stood tall and thin, their arms like spears, their movements sharp but controlled. Daniel forced himself to speak. Why bring them alive now? The Pharaoh turned his glowing eyes on him. Because you must see. Words alone cannot show what awaits you. These soldiers are echoes of what I once commanded. Against the hunters, they will not be enough, but they will remind you that power can take form from dust if will guides it. He raised his hand. The sand soldiers stepped forward in perfect rhythm, their feet crunching on the black grains. They circled the chamber, then stopped as one. When he lowered his hand, they dissolved, their bodies collapsing back into piles of dark sand. The movement was silent, swift, as though the figures had never existed. Maria's voice shook with awe. "You made them out of nothing." "Not nothing," the pharaoh corrected. "From this desert. This black sand is not like your common earth. It is the remains of battles fought before your world had a name. It remembers. It obeys. It waits for command. But even the sand has limits. Against the hunters, it can hold them back, but it cannot destroy them. That is why humanity must rise." Daniel felt the weight of his words pressing down again. Every moment with this figure deepened the truth: this was not only a tomb, but a battlefield waiting to awaken. Before Daniel could answer, a sudden rumble shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The torches flickered wildly. The young brothers cried out in fear. Tamash steadied himself against the wall. "What was that?" The pharaoh's eyes narrowed. "They are coming sooner than I expected. The hunters have felt the stirring of my seal. They send their first shadows." The explorers froze. None of them knew what shadows meant, but the pharaoh's tone carried danger. The black sand at the far end of the chamber began to rise. At first it moved like a simple drift of wind, but then it pulled itself into a tall figure. This figure was not hollow like the pharaoh's soldiers. Its body was sharper, its movements faster, and its form glowed faintly with red cracks. Maria gasped. "That is not yours." "No," the pharaoh said. His voice grew harder. "That belongs to them." The sand creature gave a screech like grinding stone and lunged forward. Its speed was frightening, its arms slashing like blades. The brothers screamed and ducked as it swung past them. Daniel reacted without thinking. He raised his torch high and shouted. The creature turned toward him, its glowing cracks flaring brighter. The torch's flame sputtered in its presence, as if the air itself was being stolen. The pharaoh extended his hand. Instantly, two of his sand soldiers rose again from the ground. They blocked the creature's path, striking with their sharp arms. The clash echoed like thunder. Sand sprayed across the chamber as the soldiers fought. Daniel pulled Maria and the brothers away from the battle. Tamash helped him, dragging one of the packs with their supplies. The chamber shook again as the creature struck down one of the pharaoh's soldiers, scattering its body into dust. The pharaoh's eyes burned with light. "Do you see now? The hunters command their own armies of shadow and ash. This is only a fragment of their strength. If they arrive in full, your world will be drowned in fire." Daniel watched as the second soldier was torn apart. The shadow creature stood tall, roaring in triumph. But before it could strike again, the pharaoh raised both arms. The black sand across the chamber surged like a wave, wrapping around the creature. The explorers shielded their faces as the storm raged. The creature struggled, glowing cracks splitting wider, but the sand tightened. With a final roar, it collapsed, breaking apart into shards that dissolved into dust. The chamber grew still again. Only the sound of their heavy breathing remained. The pharaoh lowered his arm slowly. His voice was calm but heavy. "That was a scout. When the hunters arrive, they will send not one but thousands. And with them will come ships that darken your skies. You cannot fight them with fire and stone. You must fight them with something greater." Maria's voice trembled. "And what is greater?" The pharaoh looked at Daniel. "Human will. Human spirit. Your kind does not bend as easily as others. That is why they fear you. That is why they chained me here, away from you. Because together, we are not prey." Daniel swallowed hard. He looked at the place where the shadow creature had fallen. The black sand still shifted there, restless, as if remembering the fight. His heart pounded with the weight of choice. Tamash broke the silence. We cannot carry this secret alone. If they are truly coming, the world must know. The pharaoh's eyes glowed brighter. The world is not ready. If you speak of me now, they will not believe. They will think you fools or liars. No. You must first prepare. You must gather strength, learn, and stand ready when the sky burns. Only then will humanity see the truth. Maria nodded slowly. She understood the danger of panic, but she also felt the urgency. Every word of the pharaoh sounded both like warning and prophecy. The pharaoh spread his arms. The sand soldiers reformed, 6 this time, standing taller and sharper than before. These will follow you as my gift. They will protect you on the surface until you return to me. Use them wisely, for they are bound to this desert and cannot leave its sands. The brothers stared in shock as the soldiers bowed silently. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, waiting for command. Daniel stood in the center of the chamber, torn between fear and duty. The pharaoh had shown him a glimpse of what was coming. He felt the choice pressing closer with every passing moment. He could turn back and pretend this discovery never happened, or he could walk forward into a future filled with danger, one where humanity's place among the stars would be tested. The pharaoh's voice broke the silence. The hunters will come. The question is not if, but when. The desert has awakened, and the signal has been sent. Prepare, Daniel. Prepare your people. For soon, the skies above your world will no longer be silent. The torches flickered low. The chamber seemed darker than before. Daniel felt the eyes of the pharaoh and the sand soldiers upon him. His answer would decide not just the fate of his team but the fate of all humanity. The desert night stretched wide and endless. The black sand shimmered under the moonlight, quiet as if holding its breath. Daniel and his team had climbed out of the tomb hours earlier, carrying only what they could manage. Behind them, 6 of the pharaoh's sand soldiers marched in silence. Their hollow forms cast long shadows across the dunes, moving in perfect step with their human companions. The brothers looked back often, whispering to each other. Though the soldiers made no sound, their presence pressed on the group like a heavy weight. Tamash kept to the front, his hand never leaving the strap of his pack, while Maria walked beside Daniel, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The air felt strange that night. It was colder than usual, and the stars seemed sharper, brighter, as if watching. Daniel could not shake the memory of the shadow creature in the tomb. If that was only a scout, what would a full army look like? Do you think he was telling the truth? Maria asked quietly. Daniel glanced at her. About the hunters. She nodded. He looked up at the stars, at the endless black sky. I think we will find out soon enough. As if the desert itself had heard his words, the silence broke. A streak of light tore across the heavens. Then another. Then 3 more. The brothers gasped, pointing upward. What at first looked like falling stars grew brighter, larger, until their path slowed. They were not meteors. They were ships. The sand soldiers stopped, their heads tilting upward in perfect unison. The team huddled together, watching as the glowing forms descended. One by one, the ships broke through the clouds, their shapes dark against the moon. They made no sound of engines, only a low hum that shook the sand underfoot. The largest of the ships came to rest above the desert, hovering silently. A beam of pale light cut down from its belly, striking the dunes only a short distance away. The sand shifted as if alive under the force. Tamash's voice was tight. They are here. Daniel stepped forward. His torch had burned out, leaving only the moonlight to guide them. He raised his hand, trying to steady his voice. Stay calm. Do not run. The beam of light faded. In its place stood tall figures, their bodies thin and sharp, as if carved from stone and shadow. Their skin gleamed faintly, metallic under the moon. Their faces were hidden by masks with glowing red lines. Each carried a long weapon shaped like a spear, but the tips shimmered like fire. One of them stepped forward. Its voice was cold and sharp, yet they all heard it clearly without sound carrying in the air. Humans. You have awakened what should remain buried. Daniel forced himself not to step back. We are explorers. We found what the desert was hiding. The figure tilted its head. You carry his mark. The seal has been broken. The pharaoh's tomb stirs. Give us the key, and we may leave your world in peace. Maria whispered to Daniel, what key? Daniel remembered the pharaoh's words. Only a human hand could open the seal. Perhaps the key was not an object, but himself. I do not have what you want, Daniel said firmly. The hunter's eyes glowed brighter. You lie. His power answered your touch. Without you, the seal would not break. You are the key. The soldiers behind the hunter raised their weapons. A hum filled the night as the spear tips glowed hotter. The 6 sand soldiers stepped forward at once, forming a line in front of Daniel and his team. Their hollow bodies glowed faintly with the same light that had filled the tomb. The two sides faced each other, silent and still, the desert caught between them. The hunter leader spoke again. Your kind is weak. Give us the key, and we will spare your city. Resist, and we will burn it. Your world has nothing that can stand against us. Daniel's fear burned into anger. He thought of the pharaoh's words, humanity is not weak. He stepped closer, standing between the sand soldiers. This is our world. You cannot take what does not belong to you. For the first time, the hunter tilted its head back, as if amused. You speak boldly for prey. Very well. Then you will see what it means to defy us. With a sudden motion, the hunters raised their weapons. A beam of fire shot across the desert, striking the sand soldiers. The impact lit the night with a burst of heat. 2 of the sand soldiers fell, their forms breaking apart into drifting grains. The brothers screamed, pulling back toward Tamash. Maria grabbed Daniel's arm. We cannot fight them. Not here. But Daniel did not move. He watched as the remaining 4 sand soldiers surged forward, meeting the hunters in battle. Their hollow arms clashed against glowing spears. The sound was sharp, like metal tearing. The hunters were fast, stronger than the shadow creature had been. One stabbed through a sand soldier, scattering its chest into dust. Yet the soldier did not fall. It fought on, its missing part reforming from the dunes beneath. Daniel realized the pharaoh's gift was not ordinary. The sand soldiers could fall, but they could also rise again, as long as they were within the black desert. The leader of the hunters raised its weapon high. You delay the inevitable. This world will kneel. A roar shook the desert, deep and thunderous. For a moment, Daniel thought it was the sound of the ships. But then he realized it came from beneath the sand. The dunes shifted violently, waves of black sand rising into the air. From far below, the pharaoh's voice echoed in their minds. They dare set foot upon this desert. Then let them learn whose ground they walk. The ground erupted. Dozens of new sand soldiers rose, taller and sharper than before. They surrounded the hunters, their glowing eyes locking onto the intruders. The hunters spun their weapons in readiness, but for the first time, they hesitated. The leader's voice cut through the air, colder than before. So he still breathes. Very well, Pharaoh. This is only the beginning. The hunters stepped back into the beam of light. In a flash, the glow carried them upward into the waiting ship. The hum of engines deepened. Then, with a burst of speed, the ships pulled away from the desert, vanishing into the night sky. Silence returned. The only sound was the shifting of black sand. Daniel's chest rose and fell heavily. He felt Maria's hand still gripping his arm, her breath unsteady. The brothers clung to Tamash, whispering prayers. The sand soldiers stood unmoving, guarding their human charges. The pharaoh's voice echoed once more, faint but clear. You see now. The hunters have come. Soon they will return in full, with fire and armies. The choice remains, Daniel. To hide, to serve, or to fight. Daniel stared at the empty sky where the ships had vanished. His fear did not fade, but in its place grew something stronger. A fire. If the hunters thought humans were prey, they would soon learn otherwise. The desert night burned with silence, but inside the tomb there was no peace. The chamber shook as the black sand climbed the walls like living smoke. The sarcophagus of the pharaoh stood open, and his tall form glowed with a strange fire. His voice filled every corner, deep and commanding, as if the stone itself carried his words. Daniel, the pharaoh said, you must decide. The power of this tomb belongs to you now. With it, you can rise beyond your kind and rule the stars with me. Or you can seal this place, bury its secret, and let your world remain small. Daniel's chest rose and fell as he struggled for breath. His hands were covered with dust from the carvings he had touched earlier, the same carvings that froze the sand soldiers. He could still feel the warmth in the stone, as if it answered only to him. His team stood behind him, their faces pale with fear and expectation. Maya spoke first. We cannot trust him. Look at what his power does. These soldiers will never stop unless you seal the tomb. Sam shook his head. But think of what this means, Daniel. We are only explorers, yet here lies a power that could keep Earth safe from anything. The aliens outside, the ships in the sky, they will never leave us alone if we turn away. The chamber thundered again as part of the ceiling broke apart. Sand poured down like a waterfall. The aliens outside had begun their attack. Shouts and strange metallic blasts echoed down the halls. The hunters were forcing their way in. The pharaoh stretched out one hand. The black sand twisted into shapes, giant warriors armed with blades made of stone. They stood ready to meet the intruders. See, the pharaoh said, with me you can destroy them. Alone, you cannot win. Your kind has always been weak, but with my sand you will be strong. Daniel felt torn between the two paths. He looked at his team. These people had trusted him, followed him into the desert, and risked their lives to uncover this tomb. They wanted an answer, and they needed it fast. The sound of heavy boots entered the chamber. Alien hunters stepped into the light, their armor shining with strange markings. Their weapons glowed with blue fire. They pointed at Daniel and shouted in their language. Even without words, the message was clear, they wanted him to hand over the key. The pharaoh laughed, a sound like stone breaking. They come for what is mine, but they know only you can unlock it. Choose me, Daniel. Together we can crush them. Daniel raised his hands. He could feel the pull of the tomb, a weight pressing on his heart. The carvings glowed faintly as if waiting for his command. He stepped closer to the sarcophagus, his fingers brushing the stone lid. Memories of Earth rushed through his mind. The green fields of home, the streets filled with people, children playing under the sun. Would those children grow up safe if he gave up this chance? Or would they live under the shadow of alien ships if he sealed the tomb? Maya's voice broke the silence again. Power like this never ends well. If you take it, you will not be Daniel anymore. You will become like him. She pointed at the pharaoh, whose eyes burned with a cruel light. The alien hunters moved forward, firing their weapons. Blue fire hit the sand warriors, cutting holes through them, but the sand reformed again and again. The chamber became a battlefield. Sand hissed, weapons roared, and the air filled with dust. The pharaoh shouted above the noise. Your people will thank you if you rise as their ruler. Your enemies will fear you. Choose now, before you lose everything. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the carvings under his hands, warm and alive. He thought of his father's words long ago, strength is not about ruling. It is about protecting. Opening his eyes, he shouted, I choose to protect, not to rule. The pharaoh's smile faded. His glowing eyes narrowed with fury. Then you are a fool. You throw away greatness for weakness. Daniel pressed his bloody hand against the central carving. At once the entire chamber lit up. The carvings across the walls blazed with golden light. The sand soldiers froze, then turned, no longer serving the pharaoh but responding to Daniel. They surged against the alien hunters, dragging them into the walls of sand. The hunters fired wildly, but the tomb itself swallowed them. Their shouts faded into silence. The pharaoh roared, his voice shaking the chamber. You cannot seal me. I am eternal. I am the pharaoh of the stars. But even as he spoke, the sarcophagus pulled at him like a whirlpool. The black sand wrapped around his body, dragging him back into the stone box. He struggled, his form breaking apart into streams of dust. Daniel shouted, This ends now. With both hands, he pressed against the carvings. A wave of power rushed through the chamber. The sarcophagus slammed shut, and the glow around the pharaoh's body vanished. The sand collapsed to the floor, lifeless. The chamber grew still. The carvings dimmed, but the seal held. The tomb was no longer a place of power but a prison, locked by human hands. Daniel fell to his knees, weak but alive. His team rushed to him, pulling him up. Maya placed her hand on his shoulder. You chose the right path. Outside, the night sky was quiet. The alien ships had vanished, perhaps destroyed by the same seal, or perhaps fleeing what they could no longer control. Daniel looked back at the tomb entrance. It stood silent, the black sand drifting down the steps like ordinary dust. He knew it would sink again into the desert, hidden from sight. But the memory of what happened here would remain with him forever. He whispered to himself, We are not weak. We are human, and that is enough. The desert wind carried the words away as the dawn began to break. The first light of morning touched the desert when Daniel and his team stepped out of the tomb. The sky glowed orange and gold, the stars fading away as the sun climbed higher. The wind carried only the smell of sand now, no strange power, no echo of the pharaoh's voice. The world looked normal again, yet everyone knew they had lived through something far from ordinary. Daniel turned once more toward the entrance. The heavy stone doors were already sinking back into the ground as if the desert wanted to hide them forever. Soon there would be no sign of the passage, only endless dunes stretching in every direction. Sam broke the silence. So it is over? Just like that? Daniel shook his head. It is not over. We only locked it away. The pharaoh is not destroyed. He waits, and maybe one day someone else will find him. Maya stepped closer. Then we must make sure no one does. What we saw inside cannot be written in books or told to greedy hands. If people learn about this power, they will try to use it. The group agreed. Their discovery was greater than gold, greater than any treasure. But some truths were too dangerous for the world. The desert around them seemed calm, but far away in the sky Daniel noticed a trail of smoke. The alien ships that had circled the tomb were gone, but pieces of wreckage had fallen like stars burning out. It looked as if the seal of the tomb had destroyed their connection. Without the pharaoh's power, they had no reason to stay. For the first time in many days, Daniel felt hope. Earth had been spared, at least for now. The team began the long walk back to their camp. Their steps were slow and heavy, but every person carried the same thought: they had been part of something that would change them forever. At camp, the fire from the night before was nothing but ashes. Their vehicles waited, covered in thin dust. Daniel sat down on the sand for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun touch his face. He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet. Sam sat beside him. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had taken the pharaoh's offer? You could have ruled the stars. Daniel opened his eyes. Ruling is not living. The pharaoh saw humans as tools. He believed power was only control. But power is also choice. I chose to keep our world free, even if it meant losing everything else. Maya nodded. And because of that, you gave us a future. Maybe the aliens will come again one day. Maybe others will find this desert and search for the tomb. But today Earth belongs to humans, not to pharaohs of the past. The group spent the rest of the day preparing to leave. They packed their equipment, checked their vehicles, and marked their maps to avoid this place forever. None of them wanted to return. None of them wanted anyone else to know the true story of the tomb. As the sun lowered again toward the horizon, Daniel stood on a dune and looked out across the sand. The desert stretched endless, but somewhere beneath it the pharaoh waited, sealed in darkness. Daniel wondered if the pharaoh still spoke in silence, promising power to anyone who listened. But Daniel also remembered the golden light that had answered him in the chamber. It was not the pharaoh's voice but the strength of the carvings, the power that bent only for his choice. Maybe the tomb had tested him. Maybe the ancient builders had always wanted to see what a human would do when given the chance. That thought gave him peace. When night came, the stars filled the sky again. The desert turned silver under the moon. The team sat together, sharing the last of their food and water before the long drive back to the city. For the first time since entering the tomb, they laughed quietly, telling small stories of home. It was not joy alone but relief, the deep relief of people who had walked through shadows and come back alive. Before sleeping, Daniel spoke softly to his team. We must carry this as a secret. Not a burden, but a promise. We saw the darkness of the past, and we chose light. That is what humans must always do. Everyone agreed. Days later, when they returned to the city, no one believed what they had seen. The officials asked for reports, but the team gave only a simple answer: the tomb was empty, the desert held nothing. It was safer that way. Life slowly returned to normal, though nothing felt the same. Maya went back to her work in history, Sam to his research, and the others to their own lives. But each of them carried the memory of the pharaoh's voice, the sight of the sand soldiers, and the moment Daniel sealed the tomb. As for Daniel, he walked often through the streets of the city, watching the people live their lives without fear. Children ran, markets filled with noise, and the sky above remained free of alien ships. He did not need thanks. The peace of his people was enough. Yet sometimes, late at night, he dreamed of the desert. He dreamed of the tomb glowing in darkness, of black sand crawling across the floor, and of the pharaoh's eyes burning like fire. In those dreams the pharaoh whispered again, tempting him with visions of endless power. But each time, Daniel woke with the same answer in his heart: humans were not meant to be ruled by shadows of the past. Years passed. The desert shifted, burying the last traces of the tomb deeper beneath the sands. Travelers crossed the dunes without ever knowing what lay hidden below. Legends grew, stories of a cursed place where the sands swallowed men whole. But only Daniel and his team knew the truth. One evening, as Daniel stood watching the sunset, he thought of the future. Maybe one day others would come searching. Maybe his own children or their children would ask about the desert. He decided he would not speak of the pharaoh or the tomb. But he would tell them something else. He would tell them that humans are strong not because of power but because of choice. And when faced with shadows, they can choose light. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky red and gold. Daniel breathed deeply, feeling the cool wind rise. The pharaoh's tomb was gone, but its lesson remained. The desert kept its secret, and earth kept its freedom. And Daniel walked on, carrying the memory not as a curse but as a promise for the future.